In our headlines on this Friday afternoon, starting next Monday, outdoor mask requirements will no longer be mandatory in principle. And authorities are recommending informed decisions by the public depending on health conditions and respective situations. The UN chief has acknowledged his Security Council's failings with regard to the crisis in Ukraine, while the U.S. president has asked Congress for $33 billion to support Kyiv. And South Korea's industrial output has rebounded to mark a 9-month high in March, but its retail sales and investment have lost ground. It's good to have you tuned in. You're watching the Daily Report for this Friday, April 29th, here in Korea. I'm Min Sun-hee. We start with a decision here on the local front to lift the requirement of face masks outdoors in principle come next Monday. Lee-Hoo has our top story.
Health authorities announced that the outdoor mask-wearing mandate will be lifted starting next week. The Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters announced the decision on Friday morning. Starting Monday, people will once again be able to go outside without a mask. Friday marks 2 weeks since the country eased most of its distancing measures and downgraded COVID-19 to a level 2 infectious disease from the highest level 1. However, the mask-wearing rule will still be enforced at events with more than 50 people, such as concerts and rallies. It is also recommended that masks be worn in situations where it is difficult to maintain a distance of over 1 meter between people, or when one has COVID-19 symptoms or falls into the high-risk group. Meanwhile, the lifting of the mandate from early May goes against the Presidential Transition Committee's plans. While unveiling a 100-day roadmap on how the new Yoon administration will tackle COVID-19, the committee's chairman An Cheol-soo had said that they would only start considering lifting outdoor mask mandates from late May. In response to the lifting of mandate, the committee on Friday expressed concern on whether a response to a potential increase in infections has been prepared. The lifting of the mandate comes amid a downward trend in the number of COVID-19 infections. South Korea reported 50,568 new COVID-19 cases on Friday. The figure dropped by over 6,000 compared to the day before. Compared to a week ago, the number is down over 30,000. The number of severely ill patients and deaths are also continuing to decline. There were 526 patients in a critical condition reported on Friday, a fall of around 300 compared to the week before. Lee-Hoo, Arirang News.
Korea's industrial output regained ground in March to post a 9-month high, but its retail sales and investment have lost ground. Our Chungcheong has more on this conflicting data.
South Korea's overall industrial production in March saw its largest on-month growth in 9 months. It's the first rebound in 3 months after it declined on-month in both January and February. Data from Statistics Korea on Friday shows that the index for the country's industrial output stood at 117.1, up 1.5% from the previous month. The agency attributed the rise to production growth in service and manufacturing industries.
The overall industrial output trend, which has been sluggish in the first 2 months of this year, saw a recovery last month led by service, mining and manufacturing industries. But as other indices for domestic demand decreased, it can be seen as a shaky recovery.
Production in the service industry saw a hike of 1.5% compared to the previous month, led by an increase in the retail and wholesale sector and financial and insurance industries. The mining and manufacturing industries grew by a combined 1.3% on-month amid a rise in food and transport equipment production. However, the agency said retail sales, a barometer for consumer demand, dropped by 0.5% on-month. It was driven by a fall in demand for home appliances, which was high in previous months, and a drop in clothing sales. Investment in equipment and construction also decreased amid supply bottlenecks due to lockdowns of major cities in China and a surge in raw material prices. Commenting on social media, Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi said that the coincident economic activity index, which shows comprehensive economic performance, dropped for the first time in 6 months. He added that special caution is needed as it indicates economic uncertainty. 엄지영, Arirang News.
And gas prices here are looking to become more expensive next month as the government raises costs by more than 8%. Our Kim Hyun-sung reports.
Household gas prices are going up once again. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Friday said that it will jack up prices of natural gas by more than 8% starting from the 1st of May. Households will see their gas bills rise 8.4%. That means the average household will have to pay almost $2 a month more than before. And commercial users will see a price hike of between 8.7% and 9.4%. This is the second month in a row of price hikes, as the ministry previously raised gas prices at the start of April. It said that the hikes were an inevitable choice, following a price freeze since 2020. Electricity may also soon cost more. President-elect Yoon transition team on Thursday said that the new administration will match the price to cost for energy. The comment has led to speculation that electricity prices will go up later in the year after the new administration settles in. Yoon's team said this will help reduce the Korea Electric Power Corporation's deficit, which last year amounted to more than $4.6 billion. Meanwhile, the government is making some efforts to bring down prices at the pumps. From May 1st, the government is cutting petrol, diesel, and LPG taxes by 30%, the biggest discount ever. It had already been cutting fuel tax by 20% since last November, but with Russia's invasion of Ukraine driving up crude oil prices to over $100 per barrel, the government decided to extend this discount to the end of July and expand it to 30%. This discount might not bring prices down that much, though, as the Korean won has been weakening against the dollar, meaning oil imports will cost more, canceling out some of the effect of the tax cuts. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the incoming Yoon administration remains committed to ensuring greater financial support for small businesses that bore the brunt of pandemic restrictions. Our Kim Do-yeon has more.
The chairman of Presidential Transition Committee and COVID-19 response team, An Chul-soo, says more than 5.5 million small businesses will be eligible for COVID-19 relief under the new compensation system. And according to the committee's calculations, in total, businesses lost $42.4 billion while following the virus prevention measures put in place by the current government.
During the election, because we were not the ruling party, we only had the estimates. But as we've become the ruling party, we were able to see clear data, which has been a big help.
In addition to this, Chairman An said the compensation rate will be raised from 90% set by the current government, meaning merchants will have more of their losses covered by the state. The incoming government also plans to raise the minimum amount given, which is currently 500,000 won, or roughly $400. Taking all this into consideration, the incoming government will come up with a second supplementary budget for this year. That will need parliamentary approval. So the Yoon administration will have to cooperate with its opposition, the Democratic Party of Korea, who holds the majority in the National Assembly. The specific amount for each business will be calculated depending on its losses, but according to reports, the team is considering capping the payment at around $4,700. An added, extending loan payment due dates and tax relief are also going to be used to help the suffering businesses.
We're not just going to stop at compensating the losses. We want to help the businesses actually get back on their feet and become pillars to the country's economy.
One of the major measures includes transferring business owners' loans from secondary financial institutions to major banks in the country, which would lower the interest rate. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And President-elect Yoon is touring the Chungcheong province, that is the central part of the country. Earlier on this Friday, he was at the National Nanofab Center in Daejeon and met with college students at KSEA. Back on Thursday, he visited a railway station in Cheonan where the GTX Metropolitan Express line will be extended. He was briefed on the progress thus far. Yoon was also at a new town in Hongseong and paid his respects to Korean independence activist Yoon Bong-gil at a memorial hall in Yesan. Authorities in Beijing have ordered schools in the city to end in-person classes from this Friday in their latest strengthening of COVID-19 regulations, which also include citywide preemptive testings. For more, I have Fabian Kretschmer live on the line. Fabian, it's good to see you again.
Hello.
Now, Fabian, Beijing's massive current screening process, that is, was launched after a number of cases were confirmed at a school in Beijing last Friday. Do tell us more, Fabian.
Yeah, so I guess the crucial detail here is that the authorities estimated that the infection cluster was spreading undetected for roughly 1 week. So they already said there will be grim times, there will be more cases. So the first step, what was launched was the mass testing program. So basically all of us, most Beijing residents have to undergo 3 rounds of testing, of PCR tests. And also what I've been observing is that the lockdown basically is already starting, but only a partial lockdown. So some residential compounds are getting sealed off. That means the people in the apartment complex cannot really leave. And we are right now so far at a point where in the coming days, probably it will be decided whether there will be stricter measures implemented or not.
Right. And Fabian, what can you tell us about the prevalence of COVID-19 in Beijing based on the most recent findings then?
Yeah, so right now I checked this morning the number of cases, meaning asymptomatic and symptomatic cases altogether are now at 213. That is really quite low, especially in terms of international comparison. But I mean, here we have a different concept, zero COVID, and that has basically led to really citywide lockdowns only with a very low number of cases. In Shenzhen, for example, southern Chinese metropolis of 12 million people, there were only 60 cases. And there was a 7-day lockdown. A neighbor town of Beijing imposed a citywide lockdown only with 1 case. So it's really quite strict. So in that regard, 200 cases is already quite critical.
Right. And Fabian, what is the current treatment protocol for COVID-19 patients in China? I mean, what happens once a person tests positive, and how long is he or she required to remain in quarantine? And does the isolation period differ depending on whether or not he or she is symptomatic or asymptomatic?
No, basically, if you test positive, then that means you get deported to a quarantine center. So it's a centralized quarantine. You cannot isolate at home. And usually those are big concert halls or airport hangars. I mean, really big places. For example, in Beijing, right now an exhibition center is getting redesigned as a quarantine center. So basically, if they fill up, then you are laying there with thousands and thousands of people who all tested positive. So it's really not a pleasant experience. And you have to stay there until you test negative for 2 times, and there's quite a strict threshold. So, but after those 2 tests, at least per the rule, you can go. But it doesn't matter if you show symptoms or no symptoms. Everyone has to undergo this centralized quarantine, and this can be several weeks. I mean, it really depends on when you test negative. So that's the rule.
Right, I see. Now, as you mentioned, Fabian, some residential compounds have been sealed off amid infection concerns. How are people in these areas being accommodated then in terms of basic necessities and other possible medical emergencies?
Yeah, that is not a problem. I mean, of course, getting sealed off here in China is quite strict. It often means that you have a lock in front of your door sometimes. So there's mental stress, of course, but basic necessities, that is not a problem. I mean, the Chinese state has a lot of resources to mobilize. It only becomes a problem when there's a citywide lockdown. that what we saw in Shanghai is a tragedy because I think no government can supply 26 million people overnight with all the basic necessities. But so far, it's not a problem because we only have 200 cases. That means, I don't know, probably several 10,000, probably more than 100,000. I don't know exactly. Right now, live under a lockdown. That is not really much for the government to handle. So far, they have enough food deliveries, etc. That is no problem for the basic necessities.
Right, and staying with that, there has been quite a bit of international media coverage, Fabien, about residents in Beijing hoarding food and other essentials amid speculations of a complete lockdown. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, you mentioned that last Friday, basically, they started the announcement that there is an infection cluster. And by Sunday, people were really queuing up in front of the supermarkets. I haven't seen that before. I mean, I've stayed during the whole of the pandemic in Beijing. It never felt so tense. And some people even were ordering like new fridges, new freezers, because they knew from the experience in Shanghai that you need to stockpile as much food as possible and you need to store it. And you saw basically people emptying the shelves. And at least for one night and one morning, there were really no fresh vegetables available in several parts of the city. That has relaxed so far. I mean, now people take it easy, a little bit more easy. But yeah, that was really quite a tense moment. I would say it was some kind of hoarding, some maybe even panic buying, and that has gone slightly back to normal because now we all have supplies.
Right, and what about you, Fabien? Have you stocked up on some basic necessities?
Yeah, for the first time in my life, I'm not really a fearful person, but I mean, it's just a smart decision. And I mean, I interviewed a lot of people in Shanghai. They all advised me buy as much as you can. And of course, I have a big bag of rice. I have, Chinese chili oil. I have some Korean gochujang, like the chili paste. I have some canned tomatoes, pasta, a German black bread, butter. So I'm good for 10 days, 2 weeks, no problem. And I think that is really crucial. You have to have it. If there's a citywide lockdown, no money can help you because you cannot, I mean, the delivery guys are also under quarantine. And then we had scenes in Shanghai where like the most privileged people, some bankers, sometimes even like billionaire entrepreneurs, they were asking on social media for help because they didn't have enough food stored. So yeah, it's just smart to have a little bit on the side.
Right, and staying with that, Fabien, what are the chances of a Shanghai-style lockdown in Beijing, given the status quo, and what would be the broader social and economic implications of such a scenario, do you think?
Yeah, it would be a tragedy. I mean, Shanghai is the biggest economic center, but if you only take it per person, then Beijing is even more important. I mean, here's also a financial capital to some degree. However, I would say the big catastrophe would be the political one. We have the political power center here in Beijing, and many people tell me if the same thing happens in Shanghai here also in Beijing, then what will happen to the country? Because Beijing is a symbolic capital. It's basically where also the whole leadership lives. And if they have to go under lockdown, that is a really loss of face that will probably, even for patriotic citizen, will be quite a pessimistic message. So I think it will be very painful, and I hope it will not happen as bad as it happens in Shanghai, but I'm not very optimistic that at least the next weeks will be painful to some degree for many citizens. If there will be a citywide lockdown, this I'm not sure.
Right, and adding on to concerns of a possible lockdown in Beijing, I believe our government calls there for people to refrain from traveling outside of the capital city. How does this advice look to affect the upcoming Labor Day holiday there, Fabien, that begins on this coming Saturday, I believe?
Well, I think this advice is not really necessary. I don't know anyone really, not even the most adventurous persons who really travel for leisure right now, because it's really extremely inconvenient. You have to do a lot of tests just to get out of the city, and then coming back to Beijing is really quite, how can I say, you have to do a lot of paperwork, you have to wait a lot of lines for getting tested, and there's always the fear, I mean, a real threat. It's not a hypothetical threat, it's a real consequence that you can be locked down, can be caught up somewhere in an isolation facility, and you, of course, you don't want that. And so I think especially Chinese people, they're really quite cautious. Among the foreigners, they usually don't take those rules like super strict. They have a little bit more freedom, so to speak. But even those, I mean, also journalists, they don't really travel much. For me personally, I think the last time I was outside of Beijing was end of last year. So I mean, it's really not easy to travel right now.
Right. Fabian, public pushback against China's zero-COVID strategy is prevalent in Shanghai. What is the public sentiment over there in Beijing?
In Beijing, of course, there are also many young urban people who use a so-called VPN, like an officially illegal software, to access free information. So they also know what's happening around the world. And for example, when they would look to South Korea, that it's also slowly opening up and trying to live with the virus and has a high vaccination rate, etc. But many other people, they don't have this access to information. And if you only rely on state media, they will. It's really quite manipulative. I mean, even the leading health expert, Chungcheong, he's basically guiding the country through the pandemic. He recently published an article saying we cannot keep zero COVID forever. And even that article was deleted, was censored. So that gives you an idea that the leadership doesn't really want to have an open debate about the question. But also in the countryside, there are many people who are not affected by the lockdowns, and probably they favor it. But here in the cities, I would say it's pretty much split, and many would prefer that people would at least slowly open up or even think about an exit plan, because that's what we don't have. We don't really have a long-term strategy other than isolating and locking down.
Right. And now, given that presence of public backlash over the stringent handling of the pandemic by the authorities there, and of course the related economic and social repercussions, do you envision China, Fabian, easing its strategy in the months ahead?
No, I mean, the most important thing is right now here that there will be a 20th Party Congress, the biggest political meeting for several years, where state leader Xi Jinping here in Beijing will declare his third term in office. I mean, the virus has become a political issue. He wants to prove that China can maintain zero COVID, that the Chinese system is quote unquote superior to the West, where the virus is spreading. And I mean, this is really such a political issue. I don't think they will open up only unless the economic pain becomes so huge, but I think it will only become unbearable in the coming years. So I guess it will, the earliest time of opening up will be probably next spring, next summer, something like this.
Right, I see. All right, Fabian, then as always, thank you very much for the latest from Beijing. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has acknowledged his Security Council's failings in discouraging the warfare in Ukraine. Remarks to this end were shared following talks with President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv. Kim Hyo-sun reports.
The UN chief has criticized his own Security Council for failing to prevent or end the war in Ukraine. Speaking during a joint press conference following his meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres explained that the failure is a source of great disappointment, frustration, and anger. However, he stressed that UN staff are working every day for the people of Ukraine. Saying that Ukraine is now an epicenter of unbearable heartache and pain, he underscored that the UN will never give up.
And I'm here to say to you, Mr. President, and to the people of Ukraine, we will not give up. As we keep pushing for a full-scale ceasefire, we will also keep striving for immediate practical steps to save lives and reduce human suffering.
He also highlighted that his organization is doing its utmost to enable the safe evacuation of civilians and soldiers trapped at a steel plant in the city of Mariupol. During the UN chief's visit to Ukraine, officials say there were 2 explosions heard in the capital city. Authorities said the blasts were caused by Russian missiles. This comes as Moscow's defense ministry said Thursday that it has fired its missiles at 6 Ukrainian arms and fuel storage facilities and destroyed them. Responding to Ukraine's repeated calls to the West for supplies of heavier weaponry and equipment, the Biden administration called on U.S. Congress to approve additional funds for Ukraine worth $33 billion. Biden also said that his country was working with South Korea, Japan, and others to help fill the energy import needs of Poland and Bulgaria after Russia decided to halt its gas supply to these countries. In addition, the U.S. House of Representatives gave a final passage Thursday to legislation that would streamline a military lend-lease program. The move will enable Washington to provide Ukraine with American equipment more quickly to fight the Russian aggression. In related news, Canada says its troops were training Ukrainian forces to use howitzer artillery. Kim Hye-sun, Arirang News.
And the U.S. and 60 of its partners from across the globe have launched an initiative aimed at nurturing a transparent and trustworthy internet. According to the White House, the Declaration for the Future of the Internet seeks to counter the presence of digital authoritarianism, such as Kremlin's crackdown on certain news sites. The declaration includes a commitment to protect human rights and the flow of information. The UK, Germany, Australia and Japan are among the countries that have signed on to this declaration. Now, South Korea has yet to do so, but according to a source cited by Yonhap News Agency, the government is currently reviewing the matter, especially given the launch of a new South Korean administration in May. Seoul on Thursday hosted a symposium to address North Korea's nuclear ambitions, and one participant had a grim forecast regarding a possible timeline for another nuclear test by Pyongyang. Our Han Song-woo has details.
A South Korean government researcher predicts North Korea will conduct its 7th nuclear test fire another intercontinental ballistic missile, and also launch military satellites sometime after May, as the regime continues to expand its nuclear program.
U.S. President Joe Biden is visiting South Korea in May, so the North may be considering doing it then.
The projection came at a forum held by the Korea Institute for National Defense Analyses on Thursday in Seoul, where the nation's top defense analysts came together to discuss North Korea's current nuclear capabilities and how South Korea should respond. Among dignitaries present were former South Korean Defense Ministry officials, including current Vice President of the Korea Research Institute for National Strategy, Yoo Jae-seung, who stressed in his keynote speech that North Korean nukes have already become a very tangible threat.
From South Korea's perspective, North Korea has long since crossed the so-called red line. We must face the fact that the regime's tactical nuclear weapons and hypersonic missiles are aimed at us, not United States.
In response to rising tensions, experts say South Korea must upgrade its so-called three-axis defense system into a more comprehensive program.
Methodologically speaking, our current three-axis system's means of offense is rather limited to physical force. But this should be expanded to include non-physical means such as cyber, laser, and electronic combat.
The forum comes at a critical time, just a few days after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, during a speech at a military parade, seemingly threatened the preemptive use of nuclear weapons should the North's fundamental national interests come under threat. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
In other news, the U.S. GDP shed 1.4% in the first quarter after more than a year of growth. Data from the Commerce Department on Thursday further fuels recession concerns as inflation remains extremely high and supply chains remain disrupted due to war in Ukraine and citywide lockdowns in China. The decline stems from a slower pace of inventory investment by the private sector, as well as a widening trade deficit. Despite the drop, pundits expect the U.S. economy to resume modest growth in the second quarter and beyond as consumers and businesses continue spending. Elsewhere, Africa is experiencing a surge in vaccine-preventable diseases. According to a report by the WHO on Thursday, Africa saw almost 17,500 cases of measles between January and March, a 400% increase on year. Polio and yellow fever have also been reported in a few countries. The report says the COVID-19 pandemic has worsened inequalities in vaccine accessibility and disrupted health system capacities, impairing routine immunization services in many African countries. On Viewpoint today, we shed light on a distinguished Korean-American scientist who has been tapped to head the American Physical Society. Now, Professor Kim Young-gi at the University of Chicago will assume the top post in the year 2024. But starting this year, she will serve successive one-year terms as Vice President, President-elect and the President and Post-President. For more, I have her now joining me live on the line. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Professor Kim.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Right. First then, Professor Kim, do tell us a bit about the American Physical Society.
Okay. The society was established in 1899 to advance and diffuse the knowledge of physics. The society now has about 50,000 physicists members, and about 25% of them are from foreign institutions. The society is a welcoming and very supportive professional home for American and international physicists. We advocate for physics, publish world-leading journals in physics and related sciences. We also convene conferences and workshops to exchange our scientific knowledge, to strengthen collaborations, and support the next generation of physicists, very important. And also very importantly, we share the excitement of physics with the public and communicate physics with the public.
Right. And Professor Kim, now you've been elected to serve in the Society's presidential leadership. How does that feel?
Well, I feel my shoulders are heavier than before. I have a lot to learn, but as you pointed out at the beginning, I have a couple of years to prepare. 1 year as vice president, another year president-elect. In 2024, I'll become president and the following year, past president. So it's 4 years of service. Each year, I will have different roles. So as I said, I have a lot to learn and I'm very excited.
Right. Professor Kim, pundits say the pandemic has shed greater light on the prevalence of public distrust in science, broadly speaking, of course. Do you agree? And if so, how do you explain this rampant disregard of scientific information?
Yes, I do agree. There has been a long-standing distrust in science and also government institutions. And during this pandemic, I think this mistrust became much more clearer and I think even greater. And as you know that although more than like 200 million Americans are fully vaccinated, a significant share of the eligible population refused to receive COVID vaccines. It appears that false information, either online or in person, has persuaded many people to skip the shot. And I think this is, in fact, a very sad reality.
It really is, Professor Kim. Now, what do you propose then to perhaps regain public trust, which health authorities say is crucial to allow for compliance to government policies, especially in the wake of perhaps even another pandemic?
Yeah, this is a very important question. I believe that it is not enough to say that public should just trust the scientists because they know better and they know more. I believe trust must be earned. This requires the connecting science and scientists to the public. Unfortunately, the science in the 21st century uses a highly technical terms and jargon, and it's not helpful, and it has been removed from our daily life. But the fortunate thing is that we have more than 70% of adults in the United States agree that science and technology make our lives better, and they trust the scientists and researchers to make important discoveries that help solving problems. So I think in building to this strong foundation, scientists must remember that we have a responsibility not just to do our research, do our own careers, but also to the public that we serve. So the fruits of our labor are meant to be shared broadly with our communities, not left in the labs. So the only way to build the trust back is to show members of the public that we are of them and for them, not separate from them.
Right. Professor Kim, you also serve as the head of the Korean American Scientists and Engineers Association. What can you tell us about the contributions of this particular association to advancing the field of science over there in the U.S.?
Yes, just make it clear, I'm currently president-elect of the Korean American Scientists and Engineers Association, KSEA. And from July this year, I'll become president. And to answer your question, maybe I'll say a little bit about KSEA. It has about 7,000 members in science, technology, and entrepreneurship. And our members range from very junior, like undergraduate students, to very seniors. Since our members are all Korean American scientists and engineers, so all of our KSEA members have been contributing to the U.S. society and promoting science in the U.S. And in addition, KSEA fosters international collaboration, especially between U.S. and Korea, helps the next generation of Korean American scientists and engineers for their full career potential. Right. So we are part of U.S. science, and we are very strong. The members of the entire the U.S. Scientists.
Right, it's a very strong network then. Finally, Professor Kim, do share with us a bit about your future plans while at the helm of the American Physical Society, and perhaps any initiatives to perhaps boost collaborations between scientists here in South Korea and there in the U.S.
Yeah, certainly both American Physical Society and KSEA would like to expand international engagement and collaboration. So with my dual roles, I have a great opportunity to strengthen collaboration and cooperation between South Korea and the U.S. in science. As the American Physical Society's presidential leadership, one of my focuses is to strengthen EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Part of EDI initiatives concerns issues about Asian Americans in science and technology. My KSEA role certainly helps me to much better understand the Asian American issues. So improving the EDI situation in the APS and the US means that helping Korean American scientists and engineers in the US.
Right, well, best of luck with that. All right, Professor Kim, as always, thank you very much for making the time to join us live with your thoughts.
Thank you very much.
On the cultural front, the city of Jeonju is hosting its annual International Film Festival, and this year the event includes a show of solidarity for Ukraine as well. Our Kim Bo-kyung was there.
Shining light on independent experimental films. The 23rd edition of Jeonju International Film Festival has kicked off its 10-day journey on Thursday. This year's festival is significant in that it is full-scale and in-person. Festival landmark, the Jeonju Dome, has been set up for the first time in 3 years and will act as a centerpiece for the entire festival until the closing ceremony takes place on May 7th. Hosted by Yoon and Chang Hyun-sung, the opening ceremony featured guests from both domestic and abroad, including director Im Sang-soo. The festival will showcase 217 films from over 50 countries. Widely known for having directed the Apple TV Plus drama series Pachinko, Kogonada's film titled After Yang opened up the festival, sharing the story of a family getting to know an android's stored memories after it unexpectedly breaks down.
This film is a reflection of humankind. We thought it was interesting how the film showed the way the android viewed people, and the film delivers that in a tranquil and calm way. We all decided to go with this as the opening film.
I think one of the themes of the movie is to slow down and to look at these small moments of life that we often pass by. And I think the pandemic has reminded us to slow down and to really savor each of these things that we do in life. So I don't think it could be more timely that the movie is being shared at this moment in time.
Special programs make the festival a more dynamic experience, such as a retrospective on director Lee Chang-dong, director Yeon Sang-ho's selection of films, and even a music festival. The committee also came up with a Ukrainian day to send the support through film.
This year we have Ukrainian Day, which is on April 30. We will screen 3 films. One is Ukrainian film directed by Ukrainian director, which we selected last year in the competition section. We don't know how we can support them directly. Obviously, there is another way, but as a film festival, we like to show films, Ukrainian films, for showing support.
Returning to full scale for the first time since the pandemic, the festival invites movie lovers from far and wide to watch independent films and discuss them with like-minded people. For those who cannot visit, over 100 films are available through festival's online platform. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News, Jeonju.
COVID-19 travel restrictions across borders have indeed been eased, but individual countries have their own set of basic guidelines to ensure better pandemic prevention. Well, my colleague Lee Tae-yeon was recently on assignment in the Philippines, and she shares with us the guidelines there. To take a look.
It's been more than 2 years since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, and people are now once again eager to travel abroad as countries around the world begin to reopen up their borders. However, compared to the pre-pandemic levels, some entry procedures have changed, and global travelers are being notified of updated safety guidelines.
I myself have had the chance to travel overseas for a business trip after 2 years of the pandemic, and these are some of the unfamiliar things that I've experienced.
When traveling to another country, you should find out their entry policy for foreigners. Some countries require a PCR test and quarantine period after arrival, while some are lifting quarantine measure for fully vaccinated travelers. The Philippines, where I visited, did not require fully vaccinated foreign travelers to quarantine, but travelers do have to take an antigen test 24 hours prior to departure or a PCR test 48 hours beforehand to prove their negative status. Also, the country strictly managed travelers' health by requiring that visitors download a mobile QR code showing their flight details, where they are staying, vaccination status, and more health-related information. In popular tourist spots like Boracay, some water sports activities have now resumed after 2 years of being closed, with travelers excited about being able to get back to having fun in the water.
The pandemic has resulted in job losses here in Boracay, but with tourism booming again, everything is getting back to normal.
It's great to be back out traveling again, but this is my first time going abroad in 2 years, and it's so nice to experience another culture and different food and meet people, so I'm really happy I came.
And some store owners at the tourist spot were looking forward to welcoming many overseas travelers to Boracay Island again.
I'm so glad and so blessed because there's a new hope for us to gain more income.
However, mask wearing is still mandatory for everyone to prevent infections, except while eating and drinking in restaurants. Maintaining at least a 2-meter distance when indoors is also recommended. And some shopping centers and restaurants and cafes require guests to scan their health pass QR code when entering.
Although some virus restrictions remain at tourist spots, many are now looking to travel abroad as a way to escape from the stresses of the pandemic. Lee Tae-yeon, Arirang News, Boracay.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Beijing, the city has taken further steps to combat a rise in COVID-19 infections. The capital city has shut schools and suspended weddings and funerals in an attempt to avoid a Shanghai-like lockdown. According to the city's education bureau, all schools have been ordered to finish classes from Friday, with no resumption date announced. District testing mandates affecting 20 million residents have already seen a surge in panic buying at local supermarkets as people stockpile supplies. In light of this, authorities on Wednesday announced a crackdown on price gouging. Beijing health officials announced only 50 new cases on Thursday, bringing the total from this spike to 150. In Ethiopia, child malnourishment has reached crisis point. This comes as the country faces its worst drought in 40 years, while the city of Gov't's main pediatric ward has been flooded with patients. A Reuters report on Tuesday said the drought has forced many to abandon their homes, with some 10,000 people receiving treatment at a displaced people camp close to the hospital. With 3 consecutive failed rainy seasons in the Horn of Africa, the United Nations World Food Programme said around 15 million people face food insecurity. The number is expected to rise to 20 million later this year. Elon Musk's starting 9% Twitter stake that he bought in April is being investigated by the Federal Trade Commission. Reuters reported on Thursday that the FTC inquiry will look at whether Musk bought that stake to influence Twitter's management or if he looked to be a passive shareholder. In his filing with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission on April 4th, Musk marked his stake as passive. The FTC will also investigate if the Tesla CEO complied with antitrust reporting requirements at the time he acquired the shares in early April. Those found to have broken such rules can be fined up to $43,000 per day. Barcelona Football Club are set to temporarily leave their home stadium while it's being renovated. Barcelona's famous Camp Nou stadium will begin 3 years of renovations this June. They will still play their next season at almost full capacity, but will move to the Olympic Stadium in Montjuic for the 2023-24 season. The club will be back home in 2024-25, but will only have 50% of seats available. The renovations are slated for completion during the 2025-26 season. In order to fund renovations, Barcelona raised $1.58 billion and approved a financial plan during a referendum in December. A rare 18th century violin, dubbed the Leonardo da Vinci of violins, is heading to auction in France for the first time in decades. The violin was made in 1736 by Italian craftsman Giuseppe Guarneri, and only about 150 of his instruments are known to exist. According to the auction house, the instrument could fetch as much as $4.2 to $4.7 million. The violin is being sold by Régis Pasquier, a world-famous French violinist. Pasquier hopes that by selling the nearly 300-year-old violin, he'll be able to pass it down to the next generation of musicians. The auction will take place on June 3rd. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good Friday afternoon. Spring rain, which started last night, has fizzled out in most regions, but it will continue to be on and off until tonight in coastal Gangwon-do province. And that area will see up to 30 millimeters of rainfall, which could turn into April blizzards in colder mountain areas of Gangwon-do province. So please drive carefully. And those who live on the east and south coast have to be concerned about weather alerts. Strong wind advisories for Busan and Ulsan and high wave advisories are currently in place on the east and south coast. But I'm hopeful things will improve later. As a cold northerly wind is affecting us, highs are 5 to 6 or even 10 degrees lower than yesterday. So I hope you dressed warmly this morning. And in fact, it's a bit chilly at this moment too. Temperatures will be cooler than the average throughout the weekend with bright skies, and please be aware of yellow dust as it might bother us again. Now, let's take a look at the worldwide weather conditions.
So, starting from next Monday, outdoor face masks are no longer mandatory here in South Korea, but authorities are recommending their use in cases where the risk of infection appears high. Have a safe weekend.